Waiter gets a dissatisfying tip by a group of teens, who later send an even more puzzling note. Working as a server may look easy, but if you actually ask people who work as a waiter or waitress, they will tell you just how complicated and hectic a job it really is. You need a lot of patience and must be able to multitask if you want to be an excellent server. Not everyone can work as servers, because you also need exceptional interpersonal skills. If you are impressed by a waiter or waitress's service, you can give them tips according to how happy you feel. Tipping can get a little underwhelming or overwhelming. Just ask this waiter. You would have seen that people do not really show appreciation for the people that serve them at restaurants. Waiting tables is definitely one of the most underappreciated jobs to ever exist. If you do not have a steady career but need to make ends meet, your whole livelihood basically depends on how kind the customers are. Tips can reduce due to uncontrollable factors like the quality of food and the pricing. It is the job of a server to make sure the people that come to enjoy a good meal at the restaurants and go home having a good time. Like we mentioned earlier, sometimes even though waiters give their best, other reasons come in the way of them getting a decent tip. This waiter was doing all he could to keep the customers happy, but ended up with a measly $3 tip. But this was not even the whole picture. An avid Reddit user called Seminole had something to share regarding his experience as a waiter. He had been working as a server for a long time and was well versed with the good and the bad of the business he was working in. His story was quite relatable for anyone who has ever had a dab at working in the industry. These would be, namely, the exhausting hours, low wages, and no appreciation from customers. Seminole was a man who wanted to give his best at everything he put his mind to. Even when he was working as a server, he knew he could not give up. He was going through a tough time financially, but always made sure he put a smile on his face. As he did his best as a waiter, he was given a strange-looking note one day at work. What could it be because of which he immediately went in search of his phone? Seminole was a man who loved pets. He was especially fond of dogs. He resides in Miami, Florida, in a home shared with his girlfriend. The two went ahead and decided to adopt a dog, which they reckoned was completely legal. Seminole was a big fan of his pup's wide-mouthed grin and could never get enough of him. He would occasionally take photos of the happy dog. He and his girlfriend loved to play with a new dog that was obviously very fond of them too. For whatever reason, there was a stranger that made a call to the cops on the smiling duo, allegedly due to one of their photos with the adorable dog. Just a few days after Seminole posted the photo of his dog, cops were banging on his door. The dog was going to have to go back to the pound. While Seminole and his girlfriend were enjoying the company of the little guy they took in, everything was about to fall apart. The person who called the police had informed them that Seminole had violated the city's ban on adopting pit bulls. The city had made it clear that pit bulls or pit bull mixes were dangerous dogs. Therefore, keeping one at home was considered to be a punishable crime. So if the city he was living in had a ban on owning the breed of dogs he was keeping, Seminole had no choice. If he was not willing to go to jail, he would have to pay a $500 ticket and also give away his dog. He was now left with no dog and $500 short on money. Seminole was clearly saddened by what took place, but did not want to show it on his face. A group of customers, however, pushed him to the limits at work. Since he had to pay money and also lose the dog that made him so happy, Seminole was not having the best time of his life. He came to work that fateful day with a very bad mood, to say the least. Besides letting go of his dog and $500, the night before he had to take care of a large group of office workers who were a little rude. These people were extremely loud and did not leave even after it was closing time. They were not so generous on the tip too, despite the fact that they had been such a tough group to handle. The tip they left him was the suggested minimum, which was still a lot better than not getting anything at all. But considering the amount of work he had to do, this was certainly not enough. His evening was not going smoothly at all, and he was looking forward to a new day with perhaps a better experience. But it was not going according to his plans at all. After having a very bad day at work the previous evening, Seminole was wishing for the next day to be a little easier. When he arrived at work, his day was going quite uneventful. He did not have much to do that day, but later he was ordered to serve 4 13-year-olds. These kids were there to celebrate their homecoming and were quite excited to be out that day. Since the past couple of days had been rough and not at all pleasant, Seminole was expecting the same kind of energy from these teenagers. He also had quite a few teenagers he had served during his time there, so Seminole was already prepared to get disappointed. However, to his surprise, these kids were extremely kind and polite. He was surprised and wanted to do his best to keep them happy. Then, these kids told him something. Seminole had served a few ungrateful teenagers before, so he thought these kids would be no different. But as he interacted with them, they seemed to be sweet and very polite. The teenagers also confessed to Seminole that it was their first time eating outside without any adult supervision. It was very entertaining to watch them as they tried to figure out what to do, but he made sure not to make fun of or laugh at them. Seminole could tell straight away that they were not kidding when they told him it was their first time dining out. Since they were being respectable and polite with him, he also followed suit. He made sure he treated them with the same amount of respect that he would give any other adult customer. He, however, had to give extra assistance when it came down to the food. There was one other thing that one of the teenagers told Seminole. He had informed him that she was suffering from many food allergies. So obviously, Seminole would have to help her and guide her with the kind of food that would not be harmful to her health. So with patience and in no hurry, Seminole went through the whole menu with the young girl. She was thankful and happy with the food she received. Seminole was happy because for once, he had the pleasure of serving nice customers. This had not taken place for the longest time for the poor waiter. As soon as the girls were done enjoying their delicious meal, they took the bill and paid in cash, then left. They also expressed their gratitude towards their waiter, Seminole, for his excellent service. He went to get the bill and was left speechless. After making sure he did all he could to keep them happy, the teen customers did not leave him a very good tip. They had kept $3.28 only as a tip despite the fact that their whole bill ran up to $100. Seminole was obviously left thoroughly disappointed. He had done all he could to make sure the young customers were enjoying their meal only to receive this unfortunate sum of money. And so, the waiter was having yet another bad day. He had expected that the teenagers who seemed pleased with what he had done to hopefully give him something worth his services. He was left extremely dissatisfied and disappointed. When he went home that day after having a stressful week, he wanted nothing but to forget all the bad incidents he had that week. But then, a week later, something unexpected took place. Seminole had already contemplated on quitting his job because he found that it was too exhausting and disappointing. On top of all that, his week was not going as planned, getting one disappointment after another. The next week, there was something there on the front desk of Seminole that waited to be opened. This was a handwritten letter that also contained $18 and some change. Where did this come from, and why had it reached his desk of all places? Seminole had not received a letter of this sort ever, so he was very curious to see what message it had. He opened the window and started to read the letter, handwritten in blue ink which was 2 pages long. It was not long before the waiter realized that the letter came from the teenager he had served a week or so back. It seemed as though the teenagers he had been assigned to serve that day had been deeply touched by how excellent he was with them. As he started reading the letter, he could immediately tell it was the young customers. "Dear Mr. Waiter," the letter started off. Then the sender explained that they were the homecoming celebrating teens from a week before. The letter was full of compliment for the waiter, who had indeed tried his best to make sure the teenager customers had a nice time eating outside for the first time. "You were the best waiter we could ask for. You were kind, helpful, accommodating, didn't treat us like babies," the letter read. Seminole was obviously touched by the letter and read on. The young teens were not lying when they told him that it was their first time dining without adults. Seminole did do all that they asked that time they came in to celebrate their homecoming. "So I wanted to say thank you for making our grown-up experience so amazing and fun. I would also like to say sorry on behalf of my group," the teenager wrote. The teenagers were out without any adult to tell them the etiquette of dining outside, so they were not even aware of the concept of tipping. The letter informed him that they were not aware that they had to pay a tip for his services. "So we emptied our pockets and all our money added up to $3.28, the teen admitted. Then, Seminole was finally sure of what had taken place that time. Since the other teens that he had served had always been so ungrateful for his services, Seminole was thinking that these teens were the same. He thought that the tip they had left him was a reflection of just how undervalued he was. But after reading the letter, he understood that they gave him a $3.28 tip not out of being impolite, but only because it was all that they had that time. We can all relate to the fact that when we were teens, we often make small mistakes, not because we intend to, but because we do not know any better. We can definitely agree that mistakes are common when we are young. We all know how teenage years are full of careless and petty mistakes. However, there are not many who accept and take responsibility like these teens. And the waiter now understands what happened. "I've been serving for a long time, and nothing like this has ever happened to me or anyone. I don't know how you learned or educated yourself on tipping, but I really appreciate the effort and kindness," Dan had updated on his social media. He also shared the letter that he received from the teenagers. The post was gaining a positive response from everyone that saw it. Someone's parents are doing a good job. Somebody left a comment on Dan's post. That's a beautiful, composing letter for a 13-year-old, was another person's comment. Everyone who read the post had agreed to one thing, that it was commendable for the teens to rectify the mistake they had made, that it was a rare incident. But we all know this would be easily rid of if only waiters were given decent wages. Waiters who work in the United States usually get less than minimum wage. The remaining earnings are expected to come from the kind of tips they receive. Although we all know that high-end restaurants and expensive cafes have customers who are generous with tips, it does not happen to everyone. There are campaigns that advocate the permanent banning of tipping, for servers to instead get a living wage. Isn't it a brilliant idea? We all know how popular movie star Johnny Depp is. When he went to Gibson's Steakhouse, he gave one good reason why he is one of the most adored celebrities out there. He ordered a $500 bottle of wine and left a $4,000 tip for his efforts. I have worked with a lot of stars like Sean Connery and Robert De Niro, but Johnny Depp is my favorite. He is a very soft-spoken guy who is very charming and sweet. When I wait for him, he doesn't like to be too fussed over and is not in any way demanding, the server Mohammed Asakani added. He may be one of the most famous actors in the world, but he is a very humble guy and a really cool dude. If a waiter received a $12,000 tip, it is likely that they would not report it to the IRS. It can be said that most of us would not let the police in on a tip this huge, but Stacey Knudsen, being an honest person, made sure this was not a crime or a mistake, so she called the cops. Since it smelled like marijuana, the police confiscated the money but paid the mother a fine of $1,000 for her honesty. Knudsen filed a case against them and ended up receiving the whole amount. This tipping story was so famous that a movie called It Could Happen to You, starring Nicolas Cage, was made inspired by it. In 1984, police detective Robert Cunningham is regularly at Sal's Pizzeria for 8 years. As Phyllis Penzo was a server there for 24 years, she was friendly with all the regular customers. So one day, Robert and she agreed to try and win the lottery. They both chose the digits and ended up winning the $6 million, splitting it in half. In the movie version, they ended up falling for each other. Something similar to the previous story took place in 1995. John Steele, who was an auto parts worker in Toronto, kept a lottery ticket as a tip for his waitress he was most fond of. Her name was Tracy Dalton. He requested to know if anything was won by her, and even she agreed to share the prize, if any, from the lottery ticket. They won a whopping $184,700, meaning they received $92,350 each. While skeptical Redditors have claimed that this couple just has the customer copy of this receipt and not the legitimate merchant copy, the story behind this image would be nice if true. It was alleged that the customer asked the server to pick a number between 1 and 10. When the waiter picked 7, he was given a $70 tip.